In the distant past, long before cities or empires existed, humanity's survival depended entirely on nature. Small bands of people moved constantly, following animal herds and the seasonal growth of plants. These nomadic groups were hunters and gatherers, relying on the land to provide what they needed to live. It was a life of uncertainty, dictated by the whims of the environment. Food could be abundant one season and scarce the next. But all of this began to change roughly 10,000 years ago, when humans made one of the most important discoveries in history: agriculture. This story begins in a region known as the Fertile Crescent, a crescent-shaped area in the Middle East, where the land was rich and the climate was favorable. In this area, early humans discovered that certain plants, such as wheat and barley, could be deliberately cultivated. These plants had grown wild for centuries, but now, instead of simply gathering them from the wild, humans began to save seeds, plant them, and tend to the crops as they grew. The shift from foraging to farming did not happen overnight. It was a slow process, one that took generations of trial and error. Imagine early humans planting seeds in the ground, not knowing whether they would grow. They learned when to water, when to harvest, and how to save seeds for the next season. Slowly, they began to settle in one place, forming the first permanent villages. These early farmers likely couldn't have understood it at the time, but they were laying the foundations for the world's first civilizations. At the heart of this transformation was a new understanding of time and the seasons. Farmers needed to know when to plant their crops and how to store food for the months when nothing grew. This led to the development of calendars, marking the passage of time based on the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars. In the process, humans not only learned to control the land, but also began to map out the heavens. It wasn't just plants that were domesticated during this time. Early humans also began to tame animals, like sheep and goats. Domesticated animals provided food, clothing, and even labor. The domestication of cattle was particularly important, as oxen became essential tools for plowing the land. With oxen pulling primitive plows, farmers could cultivate larger areas and produce more food than ever before. The impact of animal domestication cannot be overstated. It allowed societies to grow larger, as they were no longer constrained by the limitations of what individuals could do by hand. As agriculture spread, so did human populations. The new farming techniques made their way across the Middle East, into Europe, Asia, and eventually to the Americas. In China, early farmers began cultivating rice along the Yangtze River around 7000 BCE. And in the Americas, civilizations like the Maya and Inca developed sophisticated agricultural systems based on maize, beans, and squash. These crops became the backbone of great empires, feeding millions and supporting the rise of complex societies. But not every region was suited for the same kind of farming. In areas like Africa, where the climate was less predictable, people developed new strategies for managing the land. They cultivated hardy crops like sorghum and millet, and in some areas, they practiced terracing, carving flat surfaces into hillsides to create farmland in difficult terrain. These innovations allowed agriculture to flourish even in challenging environments. With more food available, human societies began to evolve. No longer did everyone need to be involved in the production of food. For the first time, people could specialize in other activities. Some became artisans, crafting tools, pottery, and textiles. Others became traders, moving goods between villages and regions. Still others became leaders, organizing labor and resources, often in the name of religion or state power. With food surplus came social hierarchy, and eventually, the rise of cities and states. One of the earliest and most famous agricultural societies was Mesopotamia, located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, the invention of large-scale irrigation systems allowed for the growth of vast fields of crops, feeding the region's burgeoning population. But with success came new challenges. Over time, the land became overworked, and irrigation practices led to the buildup of salt in the soil, a problem that would contribute to the eventual decline of this once great civilization. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Nile River became the lifeblood of an agricultural empire. Every year, the Nile flooded its banks, depositing nutrient-rich silt onto the fields, making the land incredibly fertile. The Egyptians mastered the art of flood irrigation, ensuring a stable food supply for thousands of years. Agriculture allowed Egypt to rise as a powerful civilization, known for its grand monuments like the pyramids and its sophisticated system of governance. Fast forward to the modern era, and the legacy of those early farmers is still with us. Today, agriculture looks very different from the small, hand-tended fields of ancient times. The invention of modern machinery and industrial farming techniques has transformed agriculture into a global enterprise. The use of genetically modified crops, pesticides, and fertilizers has led to unprecedented levels of food production. Countries that once struggled with famine now export vast quantities of food, feeding people on the other side of the world. The journey of agriculture, like the journey of humanity, is ongoing. And as we look back on the path we have traveled, we must also look forward, searching for new ways to nourish ourselves while protecting the planet we call home.